Torah, I'm sorry, L'kutei Torah, Parshas Tzav, page 26, first column, Eis Gimel. Now the Rebbe is asking a number of questions about Matzah, and he starts explaining in order to understand this Matzah, seemingly there were two Matzahs before Chatzos, after Chatzos, with a vav, without a vav. So then the Rebbe asked, said in order to understand this, we understand how a person is able to sustain themselves from food, and he explains this from Teyun, this is from Tikkun, and therefore you elevate this parts of Teyun and so on. So he says, Rabbi Agdama now, based on this introduction, Yov and Gamkim bin Yemitzah Sachilas Matzah b'Chag Pesach. Now we're going to be able to understand this whole inyan of Matzah and Pesach, because one of the questions he asked, why is it by eating Matzah 6 days are you able to come to the Gilui of Kriyas Yamsuf? He says, just like in intellectual, physical intellect, like he quoted before, that a child does not need to understand how to say anything, even how to say father, like he explained before, because then you get, that's to the level of seichel. So he says, the same thing is in the spiritual sense. When the Yidden left Mitzrayim, they didn't, just like in the physical sense, a baby doesn't know how to say father until they eat. The same thing the Jews didn't understand Elukus, godliness, until they ate matzah. Matzah represents not a meiti lachem in order, it's a meiti lachem in hashemayim, so to speak. To the word of Hashem that's in this lechem, meaning matzah, the nefesh or the kiss is able the one to recognize the one that said and it became. In other words, to understand the lukus. One minute. Creation just like physical bread helps the person's intellect function. By the way, this represents the neshama in the body. The neshama out of the body understands the lukus. He said, speaking about the neshama that's in the body, in order to understand the lukus, this is the level of matzah. What?
What about the mitzvot that they did in Israel?
That didn't make him understand the lukus. It just made him a keli for the level of Nigla Le'em Melch Malchem Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hashem revealed himself. It says Va'at Edom Ve'erya. We said that God from a pasuk, right? The Jews were naked in Mitzrayim for mitzvahs. So in order to have the Gilui of Yetzias Mitzrayim, they had to have a vessel, they had to have mitzvahs. So Hashem gave him what's called 2 bloody mitzvahs. Dam Milah and Dam Pesach. They had to do a bris, and they had to have the blood of the Korban Pesach. But that wasn't to understand the lukus. The mitzvah of eating matzah, okay, we learned already many times, the first night of Pesach, matzah is called Michla Dehemenusa, food of emunah. Second night is called Michla Dasvasa, food of healing. What? Before, healing. So that means, what do you mean, food of emunah? Emunah normally is superficial. Right? So matzah makes you digest. This is exactly what he's saying. Matzah digests. Elukus, when you eat matzah, you're able to internalize the level of emunah in das. I'm sorry. What's the inyan of this? Chametz represents haughtiness. It keeps elevating itself, making itself great. Matzah represents the total level of bittul. The same thing in Avedis Hashem. Chametz or bechinas is nasas is gastus aklipa. Chametz represents haughtiness from klipa. Mashenk, by the way, it could be ego from good things, but it's ego. Mashenk matzah bechinas shiflas achna bechinas battle retzeincha. That's the level of battle retzeincha, nullifying your will. And he says in the brackets, V'zel, that's what David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Ki is chametz levavi. My heart became chametz. What do you mean heart became chametz? He says, Gabihim shalalev neitel arshia. David HaMelech likens the heart that's ready to sin. He calls it chametz. V'chein b'loshen razal. The same thing the Gemara says, he calls in Rosh Hashanah, Kam kredim sheichmetz, kam lach sheichmetz. The Torah speaks about a certain person. The Gemara speaks about a certain person. One time it says good about him, one time it says bad about him. So the Gemara says this is before he became chametz, and this is after he became chametz. So what does chametz represent? The level of evil. The same thing, the Gemara likens the Yetzer Hara to Sa'or, to yeast. Like the Gemara says, Mi ma'akiv. Who stops the person from doing Torah mitzvahs? The yeast, the chametz, basically stops him from being. Haughtiness is the source of all fallings. The taivus. What is the original source that makes everything kaput? That makes you evil? It's all his nasus. Bittul talukos keeps the person in check.
What's the difference between amunah and trust? You trust in
One's amunah, one's bitachon. Amunah means, I believe Hashem runs the world. Bitachon means it's good. That's in one line when you have books and books written on the difference. Okay, Vinay, Yadur, Golus Mitzrayim. It's known that while the Eden were in Golus Mitzrayim, Hayisam Kusharim Leid Matzah. They were very low. They were very bound, very low down. They were Memte Shari Tumah, the lowest level of Tumah possible. And the Seichel and Midas. When the level made Tzarim, Gvul and Gashmis Elam, they were bound by the Gashmis, the Mitzrayim, Mitzarim, Gvul, boundaries and limitation. How Garmim, Yesh, V'nifrit, to be a separate entity. In other words, the Alter Rebbe just equated evil with Gaiva. So now the Eden and Mitzrayim are on an extremely low level. It says if Hashem didn't take them out that second, they would have Kaviyachal fallen into the 50th level of Tumah. That's irreversible. So the Jews were on a very low level. That represents Gaiva. 1 minute. Yitzias Mitzrayim. What happened by Yitzias Mitzrayim? It wasn't Stam, they went out of the country. It was Nigla Le'em Melech Malchi Amlochim, which is Orin Tzal Baruch Hu Shalom Alam Yisei D'Shtalshus, which is infinitely greater than world. That's Pesach, means jumping above the norm. That caused the Eden. When Nigla Le'em Melech Malchi Amlochim, that caused the level of Bittul. Like it says, Ubemeira Gadol Zugili Shchina. It's also this thing we say in the Haggadah. Meira Gadol, the pasuk says, the great fear that refers to the Gili of the Shechina. And through this level of Bittul, they went out of all boundaries. Okay? So the Rebbe is explaining what is Yitzias Mitzrayim. Yitzias Mitzrayim basically is going from a level of ultimate Tumah, Gaiva V'Yisnasus, Mitzodim Chometz U'Gvulim, to a level of Nigel Aleh Melch Malchi Amlochim, such a revelation that took them out of the boundaries and limitations, and therefore they're able to jump away from evil. The same thing, what's physical Yitzias Mitzrayim? Physical Yitzias Mitzrayim, they go out of boundaries and limitations. But when did Hashem reveal himself? Nigla Aleh Melch Malchi Amlochim. It's after midnight. But nevertheless, the Jews were obligated to eat matzah before chatzos. Like it says, Ba'erev Teichlu Matzah, which is the level of Bittul, Rotzim Achno V'Shiflis. Why did the Jews have to eat matzah? Because again, matzah symbolizes Bittul. They had to eat matzah, meaning they had to internalize this level of Bittul. Anim Shebechinis Yirat Tata. which comes from the lower level of Yira. That's ha'achana. Va'akeli b'chinas gila v'yira ilah. That's the keli to the higher level of Yira that came to them. Nimshach v'nizgalm acher chatzis. Okay, so he says like this: there are two matzahs. The level of nigla aleim melch ma'achem lochem hakadosh baruch at chatzis. That was the level to get them out of tumah. But they had to make some type of a keli. So the keli was the level of yira tata, the lower level of bittul. Yira is bittul, right? Yira is bittul. There's a lower level of bittul. That the Eden had to make a keli by eating matzah before chatzos, the mitzvah of eating matzah. That became the keli to the yira ilah, meira gadol, the yira ilah, zugila shechina. When was the shechina revealed? At chatzos laila. Okay, top of the page, second column. The Gamnikra Matzah B'Zeir, also the Matzah in Zeir is called Michla de Menusa, food of Emunah, meaning Shamuna. What's Emunah? Emunah means I trust in Hashem, I have faith in Hashem. That means I'm completely bottled to Hashem. Emunah means it's going to be good. Bitochen means it's already good. But Emunah means it's going to be good. That means I have complete faith in Hashem. Bittul. Faith is bittul. Shemavato sichle. He puts away his seichel. Ve'inem vakish tam. He doesn't even want a reason. Rak maimin ha'emes. Ve'emunah tehera. Okay, he just has real, true blue, pure emunah. Not coming from seichel. Like the expression, emunah begins where seichel ends. Something you understand, you don't believe, you understand it. So in other words, it's every Jew, the emunah begins at a different level. If a Jew understands this much, so then emunah begins from here. If a Jew understands this much, then emunah begins higher. Because the lower level he understands.
It must have been at a high level of emunah.
What?
Moshe and Aaron were there. They were present.
That's why he's going to explain. That's why it was enough one day. Remember that Rabbi asked, why then? One day was enough to make the Gila of Kriyas Yamsuf, and we need 6 days. Right. No. Chachma is when you don't understand. We learned already. The more you understand, the more you understand what infinite isn't. The more you understand the lukus, you're supposed to, if you do it right, then you understand that lukus is beyond what I thought he would be. The godliness is not a ferocious buffalo about to attack.
Doesn't that not be understanding? If you have
No.
that understanding, then only then can you really appreciate it. You can appreciate that. How can you appreciate stuff
if you're talking, okay, let's do the marshal that we said a million times. 1 and a trillion are both equal compared to infinite, correct? Mm-hmm. But even though they're both infinite away from infinite, but there's a fundamental difference between 1 and a trillion. 1, because it's so limited, its comprehension of an infinite is a billion. That's what it thinks. What's infinite? A billion. A trillion knows what a trillion is, and realizes it's still infinite away from infinite. So does he understand what infinite is in Seichel? No, because it's still finite. Trillion is also finite. So can he understand what infinite is? 100% not. But he has a better understanding of what it's not. But that's understanding that you don't understand. Therefore we learned, the more you learn, the more bittul is supposed to make you. And if you're learning and there's more gaiva, then you're not learning. Then you're learning a subject called Talmud. Or Chassidus, whatever. So he said, no, I skipped. Okay, in the third line from the second column. This level of Amunah comes down into the neshama by eating matzah. And he's had that, like he mentioned before. Just like bread gives life to the physical person, like you said before, the Gemara says, a child doesn't know how to say the word Abba until he eats bread. Where all of a sudden does the kid get the knowledge, all of a sudden, to say father? Before he ate the grain, he couldn't say father. All of a sudden he ate grain, and he says father. What's the difference? He says like this. Even when the kid eats grain, and he still knows how to say Abba, yeah, it's not that he has an understanding of what Abba is. Like he says, when a baby calls father or mother, yeah, it's not they understand why is it my mother, because he gave the seed and she was conceived and it came out. You know what I mean? They don't understand that. But they're able still to say father, that they weren't able to say before. He says, what is this connection with the father? His kasha shalei ba'aviv, it's a bind with the father. Shalei ayidei tam v'dasa musik etzlei, only hakara levad, it's only a recognition. In katnas made lamata min hatam v'das. It's a much lower level than intellect. When a baby, through eating, is able to say father, there's no intellect there. It's just a recognition of father and mother. So what does that eating of grain do? It doesn't give him seichel. It gives him a recognition. What?
If the parent of the child never fed him any grain and he was just on mother's milk, he could still say Abba.
No, it doesn't mean grain.
It's the age level.
Correct. Food. By the way, until kids start eating solids, they still can't. At a certain age, a kid is even with the mother's milk, they're supposed to eat solids.
I know, but father, to say Abba at the age of...
They usually end up eating solids first.
But
They
it's
do,
not
it's a
solid
fact.
eating, it's just mental maturity.
But it's mental maturity says of recognition. Well, let me just say, in other words, not an intellectual understanding. It's a recognition, but so powerful. He's bound to the Father. This intellect, this feeling that came in the kid through Tam Lechem, why is it? It comes from the world of Teil. Teil is not Das. Tikkun is Das. Teil is l'mayla min hadas. V'shema mat teil shel b'china shel l'mayla mi das ha-musik kanal. L'mayla mi ha-chochma, l'chein nim shel b'china shel l'mata mi das ha-musik. Therefore it comes into the lower level of Das, below understanding, and therefore this kashrus is chazak made. In other words, like this. There's a connection between the baby and the father that's so powerful, it's stronger than Das. Because it comes from a level higher than Das. It comes from Teil. Therefore, when it comes all the way down, it's coming into a level lower than Das. You know, it's like shtus, you know, it's either higher or lower. You have l'mayla min das, l'mata min das. Teil is l'mayla min das. And therefore it comes down to a baby who doesn't have any Das yet, to bar mitzvah, when they're bar Das, and they still have this binding and recognition of the Father. So he says, so it is also with Matzah. That's called Mechad Emunusa. What is Emunah? Emunah is Akar of Adas, the recognition, binding themselves to Hashem, even though we don't know what Hashem is. What does Emunah do? Emunah doesn't mean we understand Hashem. Because that level of understanding of Hashem is limited based on our understanding. Emunah, the Emunah and the contrary, usually The simple Jews have more pure emunah than the intellectual Jews. Why is that? Because seichel really, in essence, contradicts emunah. Seichel and emunah are opposite. But this level of matzah, of lechem, because it comes from the world of tehu, so therefore when it comes down, v'cho yisov ma'aminim shulavadu kameshin kedim nivra elam. Like it says, ani avay l'shenisi. From shachazu comes from das elyon, which is ein tov baruch hu l'mayla meyadas. Therefore it comes down in the nislabit b'chinas emunah. In other words, what does matzah do? Matzah feeds the emunah of a Jew in a way of binding and recognition, even though there's no intellect in it.
It's not supposed to be.
As long as the intellect is subservient to the emunah, rather than the emunah subservient to the seichel.
The emunah doesn't last but maybe 3 seconds.
What?
The emunah, that and the stuff.
You're supposed. Why? Speak for yourself. What do you mean? Why does emunah? First of all, it doesn't take 3 seconds to eat the matzah. It takes a few minutes. The emunah's impact on the people. There are times that people had doubts in the emunah, that ever told them to eat matzah. And we learned Alter Rebbe had a pharmacist, that he took Alter Rebbe's matzah, that Alter Rebbe gave him, grinded it up and put it in heavy medication.
Secular knowledge stops emunah, not Torah knowledge.
Because emunah, and it's all elokus.
Right?
Over there you're talking about identities. You're talking about intellect versus belief. But it's a different intellect and a different belief. Here by elokus, the intellect and belief is the same thing. It's all elokus. It's this connection with Hashem which is intellectual, and there's a higher, deeper connection with Hashem, which comes from a deeper level of wisdom, comes from Yichai Yechidah. Neshama is seichel, nefesh or neshama, right? Neshama is seichel. But then you have Chai Yechidah.
But Torah is what feeds it.
Feeds emunah. Why? For a very simple reason. You do a mitzvah, you're already connected and bound. If you're connected and bound, so then you can become intellectual. You have a connection already.
If you eat more matzah, you will have more emunah?
No, you get a bigger stomachache.
So it has nothing to do with the...
It's the quality, not the quantity. Well, no, you have to eat the kazayas. I mean, in order to get this matzah that you're eating, the emunah, you have to eat the proper amount, but not the 20 kazayisim, you have to be 1 kazayas. Because that's what the mitzvah is. That's where the lokus is. If somebody eats matzah today, they're not going to get emunah.
It's true. Why they require so much time to finish it? Why does it have to be?
Because otherwise it's not called eating, it's called nibbling. That's what the Torah says.
Nothing to do with emunah?
No. You have to eat it, because that's eating. A certain amount and a certain amount of time.
Is the matzah the only thing that includes the emunah?
Matzah's uniqueness is emunah. Everything is emunah. But matzah's the specialty. The first night, matzah's specialty. By the way, in the second night when it's healing, it's not only talking about physical healing, it's talking about spiritual healing also. That's why the Shemona Esrei, we have Rifa'enu right after Gal Yisrael, which is right after Tshuva. Tshuva brings Geula, which brings Refuah La'elam. the order of the sequence, the Gemara says.
Cleaning is getting rid of chametz.
Cleaning what?
The level of Amunah.
Cleaning the chametz?
Getting rid of the chametz, cleaning the house.
Yeah, but then there's what's called bedikas chametz. Bedikas chametz is an internal checking. Now, the Rebbe had one room, and that took him a whole night to do bedikas chametz. He could have built the room in that night. Okay, bedikas, can you imagine? I'll tell you the truth. For us, it's easier to do bedikas chametz than for them. Our chametz is very visible. By them, to find a refined level of chametz took a long time. So their bedikas chametz was, and as a Rebbe, there was bedikas chametz for Klal Yisrael. It's brought down that the Arizal, when he said Hashamnu Bagadnu Gazalnu, the Arizal didn't Hashamnu Bagadnu Gazalnu. Why did he say it? Because as the Nasi of Klal Yisrael, everything that people did affected him. Remember, we told this week by a class. Some stopped Yechidus in middle Yechidus, and he started saying to him, crying, and the story was somebody came into him and told him such a terrible thing, he couldn't find that thing within himself. So Tzemach Tzedek understood not that Chas v'Shalom, I don't have it, I have it, because the guy told it to me. But what he was crying about, there's a level of evil within me that I don't even know about. That's what bothered him. Because in simple English, that means he was fooling himself on that level, and we should have that problem. He was fooling himself on that level, there's a level of evil that he was unaware about. When you're sick and you know the illness, you can cure it. If you're sick and you can't figure out the illness, then you got a big problem. And that's in Ruchnius the same thing. That's why B'dik of Chametz is checking out, getting rid of the Chametz. But you have to first realize what's Chametz and to find it. In other words, if a person thinks they're healthy, they're not going to go to the doctor. So then you're not going to do, spiritually, you're not going to do B'dikas Chametz. I don't have Chametz. I'm a perfect Jew.
It's not only Pesach, it's a daily event.
Yetzias Mitzrayim is a daily event, with everything involved in Yetzias Mitzrayim. Because of that, on Pesach, Chametz is never bottled on Pesach. Normally all the Torah is bottled is 60 to 100 different din, right? Generally speaking, treif and kosher is bottled 1 in 60. Chametz and Pesach, you can have 1 drop of chametz in a 100-gallon matzah ball soup. On Pesach, it's all treif, all chametz.